Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I do not believe that there has been a piece of legislation that has come to this honorable chamber that I have had such strong feelings about as I do have for this Integrity in Public Life bill. And that is quite the statement to make, because I am pleased to have been a part of a cabinet and to be a part of a government that has done transformational work and has, on many occasions, really put itself in a secondary position, has really sought not to serve its own interests, but to serve the interests of the country and to act mindful of the worst compulsions of humankind, mindful of the notion that the people who come after us may not be so minded as we are and may not share the collective principles as the Labour Party that we share, and that we must govern for such a time that may come. And I've seen that. And we've discussed that. We've talked about what is the ideological basis on which we want to go forward. We didn't start that conversation in 2018. That has been a conversation that has occupied the discourse of a Barbados Labour Party that sat in opposition and watched with horror at acts that were taking place. And before 2016, sir, I was not a part of that particular conversation as part of the Labour Party because I was sitting in another place. I was, as a professional, as an economist, sitting in a regional financial institution, also looking on in horror. And I want us to understand, I say all the time, that we as people in political service, people feel that politicians born big, that we drop from the sky as politicians. But we have backgrounds and we have had experiences. And we come from all kinds of places where there was a time where we felt, and I felt, a sense of shame. I sat in an institution, financial institution, that had 19 regional boring members. And I happened to come from a country where that financial institution was located and which was performing among the worst. And I'm not just talking about the macroeconomic indicators. I'm talking about the overall sense of apathy, the overall unwillingness simply to do the right thing and treat people the right way. That became the Barbados character of governance. That was in 2014 and 2015 and 2016 before I came to political service. And so I say that because I want us to understand that the things that motivate each member in here to bring this legislation and to support this legislation is not political. It is about the sense of pride that we want to feel in our own country, and in my case, as really a regular Barbadian who was at the time trying my best to represent my country, but the people that I'm trying to represent, the government that at the time I was trying to work for, was not working for the people of the country. And so I say that because many of the people who are commenting on this question of integrity in public life are people, I believe, who come from the same place, who come simply from a place of wanting to be able to not feel shame about the way that Barbados as a country conducts its affairs. But sir, in that regard, I have to say one thing, and it is about the notion of this group called a political class. You know, political class is not a term that I care for. I actually don't like the term at all. Because while I understand its provenance and while I understand what people are trying to say when they say it, it really, to my mind, in my understanding, found its birth in a time when politics and class were closely linked. And more specifically, political service, political life, was more closely linked to a certain class. And those who came to political life came with certain financial wherewithal. And they had forged their careers in areas that allowed them to earn in the top 1%. Or they had a certain level of generational wealth, or both. And so one of the reasons I issue the term political class is that it almost suggests that you are born into a political class. Because class is really a social construct. And I would say that really there's no such thing. Because today, there are those of us who grew up working class. And actually whose families, whose parents, whose siblings, whose aunts and uncles, if we study it carefully, in large part remain working class. And it is now our responsibility to pay it backward generationally. I think this is something that sometimes we don't understand. And so I want to make it clear that we have come, regrettably, to see political class as meaning a certain class. And that has given us a certain distance. And when I say us, I mean socially, the society. It's given us a certain distance to say, well, those people have things. Those people have means. But if we really want to transform this country, we have to make it so that there is no such thing. That yes, there are people who come to political service as a job, as a vocation, but that it is not people that are necessarily associated with a certain class and a certain type of behavior that goes with those means and that generational wealth that they have inherited. And there was a time when people looking on at political life and service in Barbados did not think it was for them. Because there was a certain type of person who did it and only them could get through for all kinds of reasons, including the fact that they had the wherewithal to advance their own interests in their constituency. I am happy that we have come to a time where people like me can serve in this place. But it has to have certain implications and it has to mean something. Because I feel that we are called to create a certain egalitarianism in the political system that will allow people like me to be here. Otherwise, only the sons and daughters of wealthy lawyers and landowners could be here. Not the daughter of a seamstress and an electrician, like my parents were. And I always say that the only pedigree to which I could possibly lay claim is the good name and the honest habits that my parents gave me. I take that very, very seriously, sir. I came from no high-up, fancy place or lineage, not in the ways that matter to many people. That's not where I came from. And sir, I can tell you a story of, I used to walk home from Belmont School. And one day I was walking, we used to walk through the train line. There are members in here that know the train line well.
That is correct.
We used to walk through, I used to walk, sometimes if it rained, I used to have to go around the road, my mother would call it, go through Titchburn. Because somehow, even though it rained, you're not supposed to get your shoes dirty, right? know the train line well. And one time I was walking home from school, and I saw this shiny little thing. It almost looked like it could be a shiny rock, but it looked like something that maybe had fallen out of somebody's dollhouse or something like that. It was old, the rain had messed it up, the sun had beaten it up, and I picked it up, and I put it in my pocket, and I went home with it. Because I was building something, sir. I was making and my nerd, the nerd in me is really going to be revealed now, because I was actually building a spaceship with bits of things. You know, like how a bird builds a nest. There's little twigs I find. I was building something. And I took home this little shiny thing, and I put it on the table for later. And my mother said, but where is this? Where you got this from? I found the thing on the road, sir. Old and distressed. And I said, well, nobody don't want this. I put it in my pocket and I bring it home. My mother said, where you get that from? Carry it back. Carry it back to the train line. I said, but mommy, I don't know how to carry it back. It don't belong to anybody. She said, it don't belong to anybody. It ain't fall out a tree. She said, if that were yours and you had lost it and you were upset that you had lost it, you would want to be able to go back and find it. And somewhere, there is somebody who has lost that. It does not belong to you. I don't care if it is worth 5 cents or $5. Carry it back. I am the daughter of a seamstress and an electrician. I came to this place only with the values that I got from those good people. So really all that matters to me is my capacity to keep that good name. And some people see this legislation only as a way to uncover wrongdoing, and it is that. And all of the entire suite of legislation that the Honorable Member for St. Joseph, the Attorney General, mentioned, and the Honorable Member who spoke after him, that entire suite of legislation works together to help uncover wrongdoing and to send signals to people that wrongdoing will not be tolerated. But I see it as so much more, because I actually see it as a way that we can prove that we can govern ourselves honestly. I see it as a way that I can prove that the sons and daughters of farmers and seamstresses and electricians, even when called to political service, as simple, humble people, can and will remain honest. And I think we've spent a lot of time recently saying, this is who we are, but more and more with every day that passes, I feel as if we have to ask the question, whom do we want to be? Whom do we want to be? Who do we want to become? Sir, I've worked on projects in countries where the majority of people who live there, populations far larger than ours, and the majority of people who live there look like me. And in some of those countries, sir, there is no trust at all. The history and the heritage of that people, of some of those nations, in their post-independence period, has been marked by high levels of corruption. And I think all the time, but this cannot be the legacy of my people. This cannot be the legacy of the African nation there and all over the world. So for me, this legislation is not just about bowling and batting political balls and trying to frustrate real transformation with questions about where a comma should go and where a full stop should go. I take it far more seriously than that. And I think that we've become so used to this lazy trope of corruption in politics that as a people, we repeat it we reinforce it, we laugh about it, we assume it to exist, even where it does not. And sometimes we don't even recognize it in its most pervasive forms when it is right in front of us. And sometimes, sir, I feel that we've adopted this cynicism for a reason. And the sociologists among us would probably have more insight than I can on these matters. But I feel that we start to adopt this kind of cynicism because if we can ascribe that behavior to that political class over there, then we don't have to interrogate it in ourselves. We don't have to identify it in ourselves. We don't have to look at ourselves and think, but what am I doing that contributes to this? You know, there's this thing called uncomfortable laughter. And we have it in spades in the Caribbean. Whenever we are confronted with something uncomfortable about how we actually live and who we are, we laugh. And we laugh off this notion of corruption and we assume it to exist. In some ways, I feel that we almost want it to exist so that we can say, well, that's how those people get on. But as others have said before me, this is a collective matter. And it is not to deflect. It is not at all to deflect responsibility, at all. Because if we were looking to deflect, we would not have brought this bill back here and given it a second going around to say, oh, you thought it was going to be that easy to get away from it? It has to be part of the legacy of this government in 2023 to transform this matter of integrity in public life. And as you can see, sir, we are not stopping until it happens. So, sir, I feel that we have to start to expand these questions. Because as others have said, it is theft and it is a corruption when we are not sick and we call in sick. And let me be clear. I believe that we have to be able to balance and manage our participation in work and make sure that we care for ourselves. I don't like the word boss, but if I call the actual name, it would be too identifiable. But I worked with a woman in a previous dispensation who was in charge of the institution. And she used to say to us, overwork and exhaustion are illness. Here, take your sick day. She used to say, feeling that you can't cope in this moment, that if you went in there today, you would not be able to manage because of whatever mental exhaustion or mental or emotional pressure you're feeling, that is illness. Take a sick day. So I'm not saying that you have to have an IV in your hand to call in sick. I'm saying that if you know that you don't have cause to use this leave arrangements for this purpose and you do, that is theft. There are all kinds of things that are abuse of power and lack of integrity. And when a person with political power through their words or their actions causes people to believe that they will only advocate on their behalf or they will only help them in exchange for certain kinds of favors, that is also corruption. Queen Rita talked about it, if we remember. She had blessed memory. That is also corruption. There are all kinds of abuses of powers that are corruption, that are lack of integrity. And I'll say this, we might think it is a soft issue, but if there's anyone hearing my words who is associated with or interested in political service that has these kinds of compulsions to be able to use political power to cause people to feel pressure to act in a certain way, I want to warn them that a part of the transformation of political service is to get rid of all of that kind of behavior. So, sir, when I came to political service, I considered that I would do whatever it took to show that this is not the character of the Barbadian politician. In particular, those of us who are the sons and daughters of regular working class people. To show that we who come from that place can serve with honor and with integrity. I consider that I would do anything to show that. So you want to count the $5.12 that I came to political service with? Well, count them. You want documentation of that, sir? Here it is. It is immensely inconvenient, and it is sometimes downright demoralizing to go through life as this thing called a politically exposed person, a PEP. Because if before it took one form to do something, now it takes 10, or the form is 10 pages long. Some companies don't want your business. Some banks don't want your money. It is highly inconvenient to hold up yourself transparently as this thing called politically exposed person. But guess what, sir? I do it happily. I do it with pride. And I believe that if you are committed to public life in whatever capacity, if you live in this small island that is so easily demonized as a tax haven, as all kinds of things, if you are a Barbadian who is interested in serving or benefiting from political activity, because we all require governance to take place in order to live our lives, then you must also be committed to being fully transparent. And sir, I get the reticence sometimes, because as someone who spoke before me, I believe it was the Honorable Attorney General said, sometimes you put something out there and you know it is going to be fodder for loose talk. You know. I would submit that these are not the kinds of arrangements that are allowed for in this legislation, because it is a question of making that declaration that is held by the Cabinet Secretary. So that if there were to be later activity and huge growth in wealth that could not be accounted for, then there would be a baseline, a basis for comparison. That is the simple reason that this thing exists. It's not to be the subject of popular scrutiny and talk in the rum shop. But sir, I consider this a worthy sacrifice to be able to demonstrate the honesty of my people, of poor, black, honest families in Barbados and in the African nation across the world. But I also want us to understand that of the entire suite of legislation that we have brought, I do not even consider this the most powerful for the purposes for which it was created. I certainly consider it among the most significant as a commitment to transparency and a clear declaration that we have come to do the right thing. But sir, one of the things that I was most excited about coming to political service in 2018 was the work that we had to begin to do to first clean up the whole question of financial management and financial matters, because what we are talking about here is mostly about personal financial matters and personal integrity, but there's also a certain extent to which one has to exercise integrity in the exercise of their duties in office. And I stayed in that particular financial institution on the Hill, and I watched in horror. I was not privy to any information about anybody who was benefiting personally, financially from any wrongdoing. All of what I saw was an absence of integrity in the exercise of the function of financial management in this country. That's the reason I left there. I came to seek to be in this honorable place, sir, to protect people like me from compulsions, the kinds of compulsions and actions that I was seeing. And so that's why I take it very personally. And that is why I am unable to, I do not have the constitution to renege on or to be at odds with statements that I made then about the character and capacity of those who led the financial management of the country then. I am unable to go back on my characterization of those people, and I will not. But when we came to public service, the Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central, and I, together with the Honourable Prime Minister, had the opportunity and had so much space, given all that did not obtain at the time, to help bring some real transformation to the question of financial management in this country. So when we came with the Central Bank Act in 2020, a lot of what you saw then was about that question of integrity in public financial management. And so you will see, sir, that at 62 subsection 6 and 7 of that act then, it has since been amended very recently in this honorable place, that we looked at the question of the central bank making temporary advances to government to permit the government to manage its cash flow, what we will call the ways and means. And we said, we made the amendment to ensure that there was a cap in the capacity of the central bank to do that. Because we had seen just a complete run on the resources of the central bank at that time, because of an absence of integrity being brought to bear on the matter of public financial management in this country. And so we said that we would cap that amount at 7.5% of the ordinary revenue average of government for 3 fiscal years. We similarly brought the Public Financial Management Act and the Barbados Fiscal Framework, a set of requirements to report in this honorable place to the people of Barbados about the activities of government. Sometimes we hear these things, we discuss these things, and we think integrity in public life is one thing, prevention of corruption is another thing, public financial management is another thing. But they're all linked because they all act together to prevent and to make sure that there are guidelines, there are rules to prevent the worst actors or the worst actions among people who are in control of the state's resources. They all work together for that purpose, as does the Public Procurement Act. But I want to go further in that. When I worked with and had responsibility for the town planning, the Planning and Development Department, and again, members who spoke before me alluded to this, we had to look at the question of board composition. We had to do it across all of the statutory enterprises of government. And one of the things we did with that legislation was to make it clear that the people who, in the law, that the people who comprise this board have to have certain skill sets, very specifically. Because you cannot play fast and loose with the well-being and the governance of a country. The boards are not here for those in political service to be able to hand out favors to friends. And I say that without apology. We have the business of government to do. And we have to choose people who are in the best position to do it. And not just with that board, but across a range of statutory boards. We, led by the Honourable Prime Minister, took the decision that we have to put people in place who can simply do the job on behalf of the people of Barbados. The Honourable Attorney General made reference to a Freedom of Information Act and the fact that it is coming. You know, I have particular feelings about freedom of information legislation. I saw other countries deal with it. I saw other countries put it in place and then have to catch up. Because when you have a Freedom of Information Act, you have to have the infrastructure in place that whatever someone asks for at a given moment, you can provide within whatever is the stipulated time under the law. I've seen it in other jurisdictions. I've worked on it in other jurisdictions. It is not easy. And the worst thing that you can do is give people an expectation that you can provide something and then you can't do it. We have other reforms that we have to take care of, including and especially transforming the Barbados Statistical Service into an independent data and statistics authority. I've hoped and called for it for some time. I understand that it remains in the works, and I hope that it will be done, because if you give the country the wherewithal to ask for anything, you better be ready to provide anything. But I want to go further, sir. You know, sometimes we call for legislation because we think that that's the only way to get something. I have no objection to a Freedom of Information Act coming into place once we have done all of the work to make sure that we can actually abide by it. No objection to that. But I also think that some of the work that has already started, is already being done, with respect to availability of information, whether it's on Parliament's website, whether it's the fact that the Statistical Service is now publishing a certain set of data quarterly on its own website. You know, sir, the business of governance is often less about lawmaking and more about just making sure that you put one foot in front of the other and take the steps necessary to look out for people. And when I was in the position to work with the Barbados Statistical Service, I was in a unique position. Why? Because I recalled when I was looking for information, couldn't get anything out of the central bank before 2018. Data was scarce. And we started on a path to make sure that people would be able to find out whatever they needed to find out simply by the systems that we put in place. And we're not there yet, but we're on the way. The last thing I want to talk about, though, sir, in that same vein, is a set of steps, or in the same vein as having steps that fit together with this legislation. That may not be legislation, but simply is about systems and making systems work. And that has to do with the question of our assets and how they are used. It is a big conversation now in the public discourse. It has been for some time. What are the powers of the government to make use of or dispose of public assets? How do we determine that? What are the powers of the government to take action with respect to private assets, privately held assets? That is also a big part of the public discourse, and it is something that concerns people from the perspective of an integrity conversation. I believe that as part of our public financial management, as part of our transparency, that having a register of assets, of government assets in the first place, where people see clearly what does the government own, what is it at liberty, over what assets does it have jurisdiction, how is it using those assets to earn on behalf of the people of Barbados. And I say on behalf of the people of Barbados because of this. We came to service in 2018, not just on a platform of integrity, but also on a platform of economic enfranchisement. The two go hand in hand, in fact. And in this entire conversation, one of the things that we have to be clear on is not just making sure that we cut short the practice of continuing to enrich the already wealthy, which had been happening. But we replaced that with the practice of enfranchising Barbadians, all Barbadians. And I think that we can, as they say, kill two birds with one stone. We talk transparency,
2 more minutes.
we talk accountability, thank you, sir. But if we have clearly listed what are the assets of this country, what is the intended use of those assets? How can we leverage those to earn more? How can we allow people to invest in the productive capacity of those things? Whether it is land, whether it is major state assets. I think that these kinds of tools go a long way to showing people, look, in the same vein as showing our personal finances, this is what the country has. Not just through the estimates of revenue and expenditure, this is what we own, this is what we have at our disposal, this is what we can use on your behalf. And I think that that would quell a lot of the fears that somehow one day we will look around. It has been a common refrain. Somehow one day we will look around and Barbados will no longer belong to us. It is a fear. Some fears come from all kinds of places. Being disinherited or disenfranchised has come from, I think for many of us, from a place where that is how we came to be here. On this island, in this country, in this place. Our history is one of disenfranchisement. If we want to combat that history and that fear, if we want to build trust, if we want to make sure that this question of integrity and absence of corruption is a collective compact that we all share, then along with this integrity legislation, there are other steps that we can and are taking. Sir, I cannot even find the language to say how wholeheartedly I support this legislation. It is, for me, as a girl from St. Clair Bottom, one of the most meaningful things we can do to show each other that we are better than they say. To show each other that we do not have to conform to this notion that when the children of working class people come to political service, that they come to thief. If we are not willing collectively to shift that narrative, then I don't know why we are here, not just in this chamber, but in anywhere that we are across this island. Sir, I support this legislation. I hope that it finds support in every place where it is discussed and considered. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.